You know, when we look back at history, we often focus on the big stuff, the battles, the borders, the politics. But what about the moral choices? The choices regular people have to make when they're faced with just unimaginable evil. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, looking right into the heart of World War II.
And that's not just some abstract historical question, right? It's a deeply human one. I mean, when a monstrous ideology is literally sweeping across a continent, what do you do? How do you respond? We're going to explore this by looking at the lives of two absolutely extraordinary people who faced that very choice and answered it in ways that were profoundly different, but equally courageous.
So, to really get a grip on their choices, you got to understand the world they were living in. And this was a world that just descended into total chaos with terrifying speed. This wasn't some slow drift into conflict. It was a full-blown crisis that screamed for a response. What's so chilling here is just how methodical it all was. I mean, look at the timeline. It starts with military occupation, then escalates to state-sponsored violence like Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, then to these cynical alliances like the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Each step was a deliberate, calculated move toward the global war that finally exploded when Germany invaded Poland. And wow, the Nazi war machine was just brutally effective. They used this strategy called blitzkrieg. It literally means lightning war, and with it, they conquered France in a shocking 6 weeks. 6 weeks. This lightning-fast victory left Great Britain standing pretty much all alone, facing down the full power of Hitler's forces. You can just imagine the sense of dread and hopelessness that fell over Europe.
Okay, and this is so important to get. This war wasn't just about conquering territory. No, it was fueled by a very specific, monstrous ideology that was designed to wipe out entire groups of people. At the very heart of Nazism was this twisted belief in a so-called Aryan master race and just this venomous, deep-seated hatred for Jewish people. And this hatred led directly to Hitler's final solution, which was just a cold, bureaucratic term for the genocide of an entire people, the systematic extermination of anyone the Nazis considered inferior. And the result was the Holocaust. Over 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered. It's a number that's so huge it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. But we have to remember, behind that number are 6 million individual lives, 6 million stories, hopes, and families, all of them systematically destroyed. So in the face of all that, what can one person possibly do? This quote from a German pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer just perfectly captures the moral crisis of the moment. For some people, staying neutral just wasn't an option. Silence was the same as agreeing. And this is what brings us to the real heart of our story today. Because even in that kind of darkness, some people, they became lights. And we're going to focus on two of them. Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch watchmaker, and the man we just heard from, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a brilliant German theologian. They both made the choice to act, but the paths of resistance they took were incredibly different. I mean, their approaches were like night and day. On one side, you have Corrie ten Boom, the watchmaker. Her resistance was all about humanitarian aid, saving lives directly, one person at a time. She and her family started what they called God's Underground, a whole rescue network that ended up sheltering and saving over 800 people, many of them right inside their own home. And then you have Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the pastor, the academic. His was a political resistance. He actually became a double agent, working inside German military intelligence to try and sabotage the regime, and even took part in a plot to assassinate Hitler. And the Ten Boom operation was just mind-bogglingly sophisticated, especially since it was run out of a tiny watch shop. They were connected to the Dutch resistance, they got their hands on illegal ration cards, they even had an architect secretly build a hidden room behind a fake wall in Corrie's bedroom. They had a hidden alarm system and would run these frantic drills to get everyone and everything hidden away in less than 2 minutes. It was truly a life-or-death game of hide-and-seek. Now, Bonhoeffer's story, it's this incredible journey of moral transformation. See, he'd always been a pacifist, but he eventually came to believe that just helping the victims of the Nazi machine, just bandaging their wounds, wasn't enough. Not when the machine itself was still crushing people. He felt a moral duty to try and stop the machine itself, to literally drive a spoke into the wheel, even if that meant getting his hands dirty with conspiracy and violence. But look, when you resist evil on this kind of scale, it
always comes with a cost. And for both Corrie ten Boom and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, their incredible courage led them to the exact same place, behind the barbed wire of the Nazi prison and concentration camp system. This was the ultimate test of everything they believed in. In February of 1944, the ten Boom family was betrayed by one of their own, a fellow Dutchman. They were arrested and sent to Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp for women. Bonhoeffer had been arrested almost a year earlier. At first, it was for helping Jews escape the country. But later, he was directly tied to the failed plot to kill Hitler, and so they moved him to Flossenburg, an extermination camp. Inside the absolute horror of Ravensbrück, Corrie's sister, Betsy, died. But her last words to Corrie, they weren't about despair or hate. They were about this defiant, unshakable hope. She truly believed that even in the deepest, darkest pit of human cruelty, something bigger and more loving was still there. And then there's Bonhoeffer. He was executed just weeks before the war ended. The account from the camp doctor is just astonishing. In his very last moments, right before they hanged him, Bonhoeffer wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid. The doctor saw him kneeling and praying and described him as being completely at peace. Just an incredible contrast to the pure evil that was surrounding him. So Bonhoeffer died in that camp, but Corrie ten Boom, through what can only be described as a miracle, a clerical error of all things, she was released from Ravensbrück. But their stories didn't stop when the war ended. What they did after the darkness would shape their legacies and leave us with these incredible lessons about grace and forgiveness. Okay, so picture this. It's 1947, 2 years after the war. Corrie is in Germany, of all places, sharing her story of faith and survival. A man comes up to her afterwards, and she recognizes him instantly. Her blood runs cold. It's one of the cruelest former guards from Ravensbrück, a man who had stood there, watching, laughing, while she and her sister were humiliated and abused. The thing is, the man doesn't recognize her at all. He tells her that he's become a Christian, and he knows that God has forgiven him for all the terrible things he did in the camp. And then he holds out his hand and asks this impossible question, "Will you forgive me?" Corrie said she just stood there, completely frozen, and the memory of her sister Betsy's slow, agonizing death just came flooding back. But she knew what her faith required of her. She later wrote that forgiveness isn't a feeling. If you wait until you feel like forgiving, you might wait forever. She said it's an act of the will. So she prayed for strength. She mechanically lifted her own hand. And as soon as she touched his, she said this incredible warmth flowed through her. And she looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you, my brother, with all my heart." Now, Bonhoeffer's legacy, which he wrote about from his prison cell, it challenges us in a completely different way. He talked about the difference between what he called cheap grace and costly grace. Cheap grace is easy. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's forgiveness without changing, faith without action. But costly grace, well, that's the real deal. It's a faith that costs you something, that demands you act, that requires real sacrifice. It's the kind of grace that ultimately cost Bonhoeffer his life. So, we end up right back where we started. Corrie ten Boom and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They show us two very different ways to be courageous. One chose to rescue the victims. The other tried to stop the machine that was creating them. One's legacy is defined by a radical, almost unbelievable act of forgiveness. The other's is defined by costly, ultimate sacrifice. Their lives aren't just a history lesson. They're a challenge to us, right here, right now. They force us to look at our own world, at the injustices we see, and ask a really tough question. Will we be silent or will we act?